Digital signage for print. First of all, who am I? CEO of Silver Curve. Background in television and then in digital signage over the last 15 years. And Silver Curve is a company I set up in 2010 as a consultancy looking at signage. And we work with multiple vendors and users in the space. We have our own graphics engine, which we license to software vendors, which allows broadcast quality and very high quality graphics on mobile phone engines. And can do real-time content, the sort of thing you'd normally see on a PC, but on a $10 chip. We work with vendors. We help them to design better hardware, design better software, and to help them integrate with customer systems. We work with end users to help them build better content, to help them integrate their systems together, and to help them choose the right partners and the right vendors to build an integrated process. We also work as integrators, and we work as creatives. As of January, we set up a creative agency in central London, working in print, web, and digital signage. We're not exclusive at all. We work with all vendors in all industries. So it'd be good to work out some partnerships here today. So digital signage is coming. Like it or not, it's taking some of the print space away. And what I'm looking to say here is that print companies and print shops should embrace signage rather than try and fight it. Many retailers are now moving away from print completely on the shop floor. They're just using it for ambient wallpaper, where wide format works very well, but for all small screens, they're using digital. So why should you be putting digital signage in your content mix alongside print? To you, you have a large printer, you've bought it for a lot of money, and you're renting time on it effectively. But to me, the customer, you're putting my message on my wall. I don't particularly care whether that's done on a backlit translight or on LCD. It's the same PDF, it's just displayed in a different way. It's shipped to that wall in a different way. So if we look at the differences between print and digital signage, the things they're good at, obviously print has a very wide color gamut. There are lots of things you can do with print in terms of color that you can't do with digital screens. Just spin that around. Accurate color reproduction obviously is fantastic in print. In digital signage, as long as you're within the color gamut of the screen and you're using a pro screen, you can get very good color matching, although a lot of people will tell you can't. Obviously you can't do motion within print, and motion is very good to grab the eyeball. And we can remotely monitor those screens. If your poster is creased or someone's graffitied it, you have no idea. But with the screen, we can tell if it's turned on, we can tell if it's playing the right content, we can tell if the security guard has switched Sky Sports on, and we can switch it back. If you want to play different content morning and afternoon, very difficult to do that with a poster, very easy to do that with a digital screen. Then we look at installation compliance. You've got to trust your staff if you're using print. You've got to have good trained people that have the eye for detail and won't put a poster upside down, won't put a crease in the corner. Large format, we can use video walls, we can use microtiles in signage, but the really wide format, big images are still best done in print. And obviously flexible substrates are something that print is very good at. There's a few providers for that in digital signage, but not very many, and they're very expensive. And then we get to the cost side. The cost of the infrastructure for putting posters on a wall is tiny. You know, small metal frame, you're away. Whereas for signage, you're looking at players, computers, screens, cabling, networks, and the cost of infrastructure is quite high. But then the cost of deploying that content is virtually zero for digital signage, and that's where the cost comes in print. So if you're changing your content a lot, then digital signage might well be a better mix than print. If you're changing it once a year, then clearly print's going to be cheaper in the long run. Then we have the cost of content production. Now, a lot of people will tell you that you need to go to full bespoke animations for digital signage. I would say, well, you've got a PDF for your print. Just use the same PDF on the screen. There's no reason to do something more than you would have done on posters if you just treat digital signage just as a different way of delivering that same content. Here's an example of installation compliance. Head office had a lovely message to send out. The local staff really screwed it up. landscape picture in a portrait frame, which if it wasn't that message would be fine. But obviously head office are completely unaware that that was done wrong. Whereas with digital signage, you'd have feedback saying that there's portrait content on a landscape screen or vice versa. So both screens and print have their place, and a mix of the two is probably the way we're going to go forward, at least for the next 5 or 10 years. The specialities of signage are in communicating detail. We can bring in internal content feeds, we can bring in the room booking system and tell you when there's next a meeting room available and how far away it is. We can tell you about the promotion opportunities within a company. I did a project at a bank a few years ago where the system paid for itself in 6 months in reduced recruitment fees by promoting internally rather than recruiting externally. We can have peer-to-peer communication, allow staff to talk to each other using Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and bring that content onto those screens within the site. Obviously, we'd moderate that if it's publicly visible. Local travel, how long is it till the next train? Should I stay at my desk for another 10 minutes, or do I need to run to get my train? Those are the sorts of things we can do with signage that we can't do with print. And it's already started. 15 years ago, people started to use digital signage rather than print. I'm now working with retailers who are saying we're not going to print anything anymore. We're doing everything digital. We're giving the staff iPads. We're not going to have any leaflets. If we have a takeaway, we'll send the customer a link to our website. We won't have any printed brochures. We're even moving away from catalogs and moving purely to the website. So, as a print shop, how would you embrace signage rather than run away from it and add it to your portfolio? You're already managing content. You're building a signage workflow today. All you have to do is swap out a couple of pieces and you go from printing to your inkjet printer into your digital screen. And pretty much all you have to do is, rather than your RIP process scheduling to your printer, you schedule to your CMS. And Caldera already launching software products that integrate the two together. What are you going to need to do it? Each screen, you're going to need a screen, a player computer, you're going to need a housing to put that screen in to make it vandal-proof, and you're going to need an internet connection. Nowadays, all of that is very, very easy. A domestic internet connection is all you would need. And in the middle, you need a content management system. There are about 300 to choose from. So it's not rocket surgery. You plug them in, you turn them on, off they go. We can get a system up and running nowadays in an hour. Except it is rocket surgery. There is so much choice. Do you self-host? Do you put it in the cloud? Which of the 300 vendors do you use? Is it Windows or Android or Linux? Do you sell it to your customer as a hardware piece that they buy up front, or do you rent it on a monthly basis? There are lots and lots of options. So if we look at how you would choose some of those options, the first one is to look at whether you want to schedule your content by playlists or by rules. So a playlist would be a set of content that plays A, then B, then C, then D. And it always plays in that order, and it just loops and loops and loops. And that's great if your content doesn't change very often, or if one person is controlling it. It's very easy to set it up, very much like setting up a PowerPoint. You know exactly what order things are going to play in. But if one of those pieces of content is only valid on Wednesdays, and one of them's not valid until the 1st of August, and one of them only plays when that product's in stock, and one of them only plays when it's raining, now you get to a point where playlists become very unwieldy. We did a project a few years ago with Marks & Spencer in the UK, a big multinational retailer, and they looked at their business rules, and they said, okay, we've got portrait content and landscape content. We've got in-store and window content. We've got fashion content and food content. They actually ended up with more playlists than they had players. We needed over 40,000 playlists to do the complexity of scheduling they needed. And that's where rules come in. Rules allow you to say, here's my business rules, and I'll describe my content, I'll describe my players, and then the rules will decide what plays where. And I'll come on to that in a minute. Then we have the choice of where you stick the CMS. Is it on-premise? Are you going to host it for yourself? Are you going to put it on the customer's premises? Or are you going to host it in a data center somewhere or in the cloud? You might look there at what the content is. We're working on a project for a TV studio in America where they're showing pre-release footage of their new movie. And obviously that cannot leave the building. So there you'd put an on-premise server in. If you're running 3 screens for a local chip shop, then putting it in the cloud is absolutely fine. So if we look at that playlist scenario, If we just have one playlist with 3 or 4 items in it, we can deliver that to all screens, and that's trivial to manage. It's 4 slides in PowerPoint, effectively. But then we have a portrait and a landscape playlist. Then we have a portrait Cologne and portrait Paris, and landscape Cologne and landscape Paris. And pretty soon, we get a huge number of playlists. And with a large installation, with maybe 20+ sites, with multiple departments in those sites, with multiple screens, you get to a situation where it's very difficult to look at that and say, which of those circles is the green one not in that it should be in? So it's very easy to make a mistake and very hard to find that mistake afterwards. So if you move to a rules-based system where you describe your content and you describe your screens, here we have 3 pieces of content which we've described in various ways, and we have some exclusion rules that say don't play the content if the orientation of the content doesn't match the orientation of the screen. So play portrait content on portrait screens, landscape on landscape screens. We can then add some selection rules. So we can say that if the content is a lunch menu and the location of the content matches the location of the screen, so maybe which building it's in, there's a local canteen, you don't want to play the Paris menu in the Barcelona venue. And we'll say because it's a lunch menu, we'll only play it in the mornings. There's no point in playing the lunch menu in the afternoons. Then we can route that content to the screen. And we can just add more and more rules. And each rule is very easy to understand. We only want to play trailers if the certificate is not an 18 certificate. We don't want to risk playing that to children, for example. And suddenly in 5 rules, we've got what might have been 50 or 100 playlists. And we can look at those 5 rules and we can give them to the business user that bought the system and say, do they do the right thing? Because they're human readable. And then we can just type them into the system and off we go. So there are CMS systems out there that are playlist-based. There are CMS systems out there that are rules-based. And depending on the size of your client, you need to be looking for a different set of functionality. So multiple playout zones. This is something that signage companies will sell you day in, day out. And I would say stay well away from it. They'll sell you 4 or 5 zones on the screen. The customer doesn't know which one to look at. They're all moving. They're distracting you from the actual information you want to see. You'd never put up a poster and divide it into 5 zones with 5 completely different messages in each zone. You wouldn't put your menu on one side and your advert on another and your social media printout, if such a thing exists, at the bottom. But with signage, people do it all the time. And I would say it's much better to play full screen content, but make up a playlist of 5 or 6 pieces. So when the viewer looks at the screen, there's one thing to look at. And that also makes it much easier to manage because you've just got one playlist or one set of rules driving the screen as a full screen item. So then you get to your hardware infrastructure. You could sell your customers the hardware, the screen, the player, or you could lease it to them or rent it to them. But what I would say is don't manage it yourselves. Bring in an expert company, an AV company or an IT company to do the hardware supply, the maintenance, the on-site support for you. You should stick with content because hardware is difficult. And it gets very expensive if you have to hold stock in case something goes wrong. And there are companies out there already holding that stock that can do it for you. Then we look at the operating system. There are basically 3 main operating systems that you'll get asked about by your customers: Windows, Linux, and Android. Windows at the top, about 50 or 60 pounds more expensive than the other 2, so sort of 80 euros or so, but much more reliable than people will tell you. If you set it up correctly and you don't fiddle with it, it's brilliantly reliable. I've got Windows systems out there, been running 7 to 10 years, never gone wrong. Linux is free, it's very, very reliable, but it's really hard to set up, and you need a deep expert to go and do that for you. With Windows, you press the button, it does it for you. And then we have Android, tablets and other devices. The big problem with Android is very cheap, but it changes all the time. They'll change the chip without telling you. Suddenly, your software won't work anymore. There's one company we're working with Android players out there that have 20 different builds of the hardware out in the field. And whenever they make their content, they have to test it on 20 different players before they can say, yes, it's going to work everywhere. The key consideration here is going to be low power usage. You're going to want something that draws less than 10 watts. There's a rather useful number that 1 watt 24/7 for a year costs almost exactly €1 in Europe. It costs almost exactly £1 in the UK, and it costs almost exactly $1 in the US. If you've got a PC out there, it's probably drawing 50 to 75 watts, costing you 50 to 75 euros a year, whereas an Android box, a Raspberry Pi, those sort of very low power devices will cost you 2 to 5 euros a year. So if your customer's rolling out 1,000 screens, there can be a big saving in power in rolling out a smaller box. You're also looking at probably halving the hardware cost. Then we look at the network. Those players have to connect to your server and download all the content you're sending to them. It's pretty simple. A broadband connection is good enough, even a domestic broadband. It doesn't have to be tremendously reliable. It only has to be up when you want to send new content to it. So if you send content once a month, it can be down 20 days a month and you won't care. It's only on that day you want to upload content. You can also upload content in advance. So you can say, make this play from Monday onwards, upload it the previous Tuesday, and you've got a week to sort out the network if there are any problems. It's perfectly valid to use the customer's network. You'll be using very little bandwidth, and we've got plenty of customers out there just piggybacking on their internal network. All you need is an internet connection to get to your server. I would say don't use Wi-Fi to talk to your players. It works fine on day one, and then someone changes the password, and all your players refuse to connect. Or someone just goes and moves the aerials, and suddenly you can't deliver content to your screens. If you're in something like a leisure center, it'll work perfectly until 7 in the morning when they turn the radios on, and then none of it works. There's no money in selling hardware to your customers. The vendors we work with make 1% to 4% on hardware, and then they have to hold the stock, and they have to keep engineers ready to go into the field to mend it. I would say outsource that. Sell the service to your customer and outsource all the hardware and installation. I think print shops should make the money on managing the content. That's what you're already doing. You know how to do it. You've already got a process in place that's virtually the same as you would need to do for signage. So the partners you're going to need are going to be a hardware supplier to sell you the screens, the players, a software vendor to put the player software and CMS software on those players, and installation team. That red set, you can probably find one company that does all three of those as a local vendor to you. Then you're going to need an integrator to bring your RIP software into your CMS. If you're doing a small volume of work, you may just do it manually and enter into both systems. But if you're doing a large volume, it's probably worth integrating those together. Some of those integrations already exist from companies like Caldera. And then you're going to need somewhere to put your server, a data center, a cloud hosting, or on your customer's site. That covers my part. Any questions?